Picture the sound of a city that doesn't care whether you can hear it or not. Now imagine you can't see any of it. None of the horse-drawn omnibuses bearing down on you from the left. None of the coal carts swinging wide around corners. None of the gaps in the pavement where the cobblestones have been ripped up for gas pipe repairs and never properly replaced. None of the faces that look right through you as if you're a lamppost. A particularly useless lamppost. That's London in the 1880s, from the outside. From the inside, from inside the dark, it sounds like this. Hooves. Always hooves. Hundreds of them, striking cobblestone at different gates, different weights, different moods. A cart horse doesn't sound like a cab horse. A cab horse doesn't sound like a carriage horse with brass fittings and a coachman in livery. You learn the difference. You have to learn the difference, because if you don't, the difference will introduce itself to you at speed and without warning. Coal smoke and river mud, and the particular sweetness of horse dung fermenting in puddles, bread from a bakery 3 streets over, tobacco from every doorway, fish, always fish somewhere. This is a city of 4.5 million people, the largest city on earth in the year 1883, an empire's engine room, the financial heart of the world, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, down a passage off Stamford Street just south of Waterloo Bridge that smells of old cabbage and newer misery, you're lying on a straw mattress that someone else slept on before you and trying to remember how many pennies you have left. 2. You have 2 pennies. Your lodging cost 4p a night. And you have not yet played a single note today. I make these history stories, and I'll be honest with you, this one took me a while to understand, because it's not a story about what you can see in the 1880s. It's about what you hear, what you feel through the soles of your boots. What the cold does to the strings of a fiddle at 7:30 on a November morning, when the fog off the Thames is so thick you can taste the river in your mouth. What it means to build an entire life, an entire geography of a city, out of sound and memory and the particular way that coins feel when they land in a hat instead of just missing it and skittering across the cobblestones. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Pull whatever you're sleeping under a little closer. Here we go. Your eyes open. Well, your eyes don't open. That's not quite the right phrase anymore. After 3 years, you know better than to use it even in your own head. But something shifts, some interior switch that says, you're awake now. The world that exists in your body, the weight of it, the temperature of it, the sounds pressing against it from outside comes back. And the first thing you notice is the smell. Not because the smell is particularly new or interesting, but because in this place, in the common lodging house on Stamford Street just south of Waterloo Bridge, the smell is the most reliable thing there is. It tells you everything about the morning, everything about what you're walking into. Right now, it smells of bodies. 23 of them, all male, all in various states of decomposition and desperation, all breathing in a room that measures roughly 40 feet by 20, with 6 windows that were painted shut sometime in the previous decade. Old wool soaked in old sweat, the particular sourness of men who have eaten badly for months and whose guts are protesting about it in the middle of the night. Someone's boots drying near the iron stove, which means the stove is actually lit, which is rarer than it should be. The leather of those boots and the wet wool of whatever socks are draped over the guard, and underneath all of it, the smell that all lodging houses share regardless of their price or their pretensions, the smell of lives being lived at their absolute margins, wood that's absorbed a century of despair, plaster that sweats with damp in cold weather and sweats with something worse in warm. coal smoke drifting down the chimney because the wind is coming from the south, which means the fog is coming from the river. River fog. That's the worst kind. It has a specific character, Thames fog. Not clean country fog that smells of grass and distance. Thames fog smells of the river itself, of the mud flats exposed at low tide, which contain everything the city has been throwing into the water for 800 years, of the coal barges and the refuse boats, of the factories upstream at Lambeth and Battersea, of fish and brine, and the particular rot that happens when you combine all of these things with the smoke from 4 million coal fires and let it all settle at ground level for 12 hours. By November 1883, you've lived in London for 7 months. You know this smell the way you know the strings of your fiddle, intimately and sometimes with real hatred. The room is still dark, in the sense that the other lodgers are still mostly asleep, still breathing in that irregular collective rhythm of 23 bodies that aren't quite comfortable, that are sleeping the way people sleep when they have enough to be grateful they found a roof, and not quite enough to relax under it. A few men are snoring. One man, the coal heaver, 3 beds over to your left, is talking in his sleep. Something about a horse. He does this most nights. You know the room by its geography the way a sighted man knows it by its look. The door is 14 steps from the foot of your cot, slightly to the left. The stove is 6 steps from the door, and there are 2 cots between your position and the stove that you have to go round rather than through, because the men who sleep in those cots are both large and both prone to waking badly. The washstand is in the far left corner, 12 steps past the stove, and the basin is cracked on one side, which means you have to angle it just so, or the water runs out across the shelf. You can walk this room in complete darkness at any speed. You've had to. Your name is Thomas Briggs. Tom, to anyone who's bothered to learn it. You're 22 years old. You came from Birmingham 7 months ago with your grandfather's fiddle. A letter of introduction to a man who turned out to have moved to Manchester, 11 shillings, and the kind of determination that only works in the short term before reality wears it down. You've been playing music since you were old enough to hold a bow. You lost your sight at 18. Sulfuric acid in a pen nib factory where you were working because the wages were better than the foundry and the hours were slightly more human. A container improperly sealed, a moment of carelessness, yours, though the foreman said otherwise, and then 2 seconds of fire in your eyes that changed everything. Everything! Back in Birmingham there was the workhouse. There were relatives who did what they could and then did slightly less. There was a period, 6 months, maybe 9. You've stopped being precise about it because precision hurts. Of sitting in a room learning that your world had shrunk to the size of your own body. And then there was the fiddle. Your grandfather had played it at weddings and harvest dances, and once, famously, at a wake that turned into something considerably livelier than the deceased's family had intended. It had been sitting in the corner of your aunt's front room, slightly out of tune, gathering the particular kind of dust that settles on things nobody touches. You started playing again, first clumsily, relearning the positions by feel, by the slight pull of the string under your fingertip, by the vibration of the wood against your chin, then better. Then, after a year, something happened that you can't fully explain. You got good. Better than before, maybe. Without eyes pulling your attention to the room, to the faces, to the movement of your own fingers, something else opened up. The sound became the whole world. The resonance of the instrument against your body, the harmonics that told you whether you were in tune or fractionally off, the way the bow felt when you were drawing it at exactly the right pressure versus the way it dragged when you weren't. 3 months after you started playing again, a man on the street outside your aunt's house stopped to listen. He stood there for 20 minutes in the Birmingham rain. When he knocked on the door, your aunt answered, and he asked if the blind boy inside would like to earn money. You started busking in Birmingham. You were not bad at it. But Birmingham is Birmingham, a fine city, a hard city, a city that knows what it knows and has been knowing it for generations. London is where the money is. Everyone says so. London is where there are enough people with enough coins that even a blind fiddle player can find a living if he works hard and knows where to stand and doesn't get moved on too often by the police. 7 months in, you're still figuring out the last 2 parts. You sit up. The straw mattress crackles under you. You're still fully dressed because the room gets cold enough at night that undressing feels like a form of self-harm. Your coat, your waistcoat, your shirt, even your boots. You only take the boots off because sleeping in them gives you cramps in your calves. They're sitting right beside the cot, oriented the right way so you can find them without fumbling. That matters in the dark, not your dark specifically. Everyone's dark before the morning comes up. You lace the boots. The lace on the left one is fraying near the eyelet. You'll need to fix that soon. A broken lace means a loose boot. Means a loose boot on wet cobblestones means... You don't finish that thought. You've been meaning to fix it for 2 weeks. The 2 pennies are in the small interior pocket of your waistcoat. You check without looking. They're still there. A penny halfpenny farthing is what the fiddle case comes to, with the strap that keeps it closed properly and the bit of oilcloth you've wrapped around the neck. The fiddle itself, your grandfather's fiddle, made by no one famous, worth perhaps 15 shillings on a good day to someone who didn't know better, and probably less, is the most important thing you own. More important than the boots, more important than the coat. You get up, navigate to the washstand, and discover that someone has already used most of the water and not replaced it from the bucket. There's maybe a cup's worth left in the basin, gone cold overnight, with a grey film on it that you notice by running your finger across the surface. You splash what there is on your face. It's cold enough to make your breath catch. The crack in the basin drains it before you can use it twice. Good morning, London. Downstairs, 14 steps, then the door, then a narrow passage, then a second door, then 12 steep stairs with a missing riser on the 4th step from the bottom. Mrs. Wicklow is in the kitchen. You know she's there from the sound of the cast-iron kettle on the range and the smell of something that might charitably be called tea being brewed from leaves that have been used at least twice, and possibly 3 times before. Mrs. Wicklow runs the lodging house. She is, in the taxonomy of London's boarding-house keepers, neither the best nor the worst. She charges 4p a night, which is on the edge of what men like you can afford and considerably less than a private room anywhere. She demands payment in advance, always, without exception, without sentiment, and she will put you out in the street at 8 in the evening if you haven't paid by 7. She feeds her lodgers a supper of bread and dripping 3 nights a week and nothing the other 4. She has a dog, a grey terrier of no particular breed who knows exactly who the regulars are and accepts them without comment. The terrier's name is Parliament. Mrs. Wicklow thinks this is funny. Briggs, she says as you come in. Not a greeting exactly. More of an acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge furniture. Morning. You owe for tonight. I know. Before 7. I know. The tea when she pours it is hot at least, thin and slightly bitter with that particular quality of twice-used leaves, but hot. You wrap both hands around the cup because your hands are the most important part of your professional life, and the November morning has already gotten into them. The fingers of your left hand, especially the fingering hand, need to stay supple and warm or the music suffers. You eat a piece of bread that Mrs. Wicklow puts down in front of you without comment. You know it's bread from the sound of it being placed on the wooden surface and from the smell, a bit stale, a heel from a loaf that probably started its life 2 days ago. You eat it anyway. On 2 pennies, breakfast is a luxury you don't turn down. Outside, the street is already alive. You can hear it through the single window of Mrs. Wicklow's kitchen, a small window with glass thick with grime, which does nothing to reduce the noise but does reduce the cold marginally. Wheels on cobblestones, the particular rhythm of a coal cart, heavy and slow, the horse working hard against the weight. Voices, a costermonger starting his day early, calling something you can't quite make out from this distance. Dogs. The fog is still down. You can tell because the sound has a different quality in fog. Everything is slightly muffled, slightly closer. The echo that normally bounces off the buildings comes back softer, as if the air itself has been wrapped in damp wool. Sound travels differently through fog. It's not worse, just different. The world gets smaller, more intimate in an uncomfortable way. You finish the bread and stand up. "Don't play on the bridge," Mrs. Wicklow says, without looking up from whatever she's doing at the range. Police have been about Waterloo Bridge again. Moved 3 men on yesterday. Waterloo's not my pitch. Your pitch is wherever you can stand without being moved on. Just saying. She's not wrong. She's almost never wrong about the practical geography of survival in this city. She's been running this house for 11 years, and she knows the patterns of the police and the market and the weather the way a good river pilot knows the sandbanks from experience that has occasionally included running aground. You pick up your fiddle case from where you left it beside the door. The strap goes over your left shoulder, the case itself resting against your right hip at the angle that keeps it balanced and your bow arm free. You know this configuration the way you know your own face. The door opens onto Stamford Street and London comes in. Let me talk about what it is to navigate a city when you can't see it. Because this is the thing that most people, sighted people who've never had to think about it, don't understand. It's not just about not being able to see, it's about what replaces vision. And what replaces vision is exhausting in a specific way that doesn't have a good name. You build a map in your head, not a visual map, nothing like what you can remember from before, when maps looked like maps and streets looked like streets. A different kind. A map made of textures. The change from cobblestones to flagstones outside the church on the corner of Stamford Street and Waterloo Road. The slope of the pavement as it approaches the junction. You can feel it through your boots before you hear the traffic change. The smell of the tannery on the far side of Waterloo Road, which is always there, always slightly to the right as you face south, as reliable as a compass bearing. The sound of the trains on the railway bridge, not Waterloo Station, which is further along, but the approach bridge for the goods yard, which gives you a sound bearing when you're uncertain of your position. And Danny Crow is 10 years old, small for his age, with the sharp eyes of a child who's been surviving by them since before he was old enough to go to school. He sleeps, when he sleeps indoors, which is not always, in a room above a rag and bone shop in Lambeth run by his uncle who charges him half his earnings for the privilege. His father is somewhere, his mother is somewhere else. The details get vague when you ask. He meets you at the corner of Stamford Street every morning at 7, or thereabouts. Danny's sense of time is approximately accurate. He's never more than 15 minutes off, which in a 10-year-old from Lambeth constitutes a form of professionalism. You hear him before you reach the corner. The particular sound of his boots. He has one boot with a loose sole on the right foot that slaps the pavement when he walks, and the low whistle he does when he spots you. Something tuneless and automatic. Not a greeting exactly, but a signal. I see you. I'm here. Fog's bad, he says, materializing at your left side with the ease of someone who's been doing this for months. He takes your left arm just above the elbow. That's the arrangement. Always the left arm, always above the elbow, never the wrist, and adjusts his pace to yours. Can't see the bridge from here. Can you ever see the bridge from here? On a clear day you can see the top of it. Is today a clear day? No? Then let's walk. Danny earns 3p a day from you. 3p to guide you between your lodging house and your pitch and anywhere else you need to go, to alert you to hazards, holes in the road, people walking directly at you, low-hanging signs, the drainage channels that cross the pavement at irregular intervals and that you've walked into twice and don't intend to walk into a third time, and to watch the hat while you play, which is the part of the arrangement that Danny takes most seriously, because it involves a level of confrontation that he has absolutely no hesitation about. Danny is small, but he is, in Mrs. Wicklow's considered phrase, hard as last week's bread. He has defended your hat against pickpockets, competing buskers, and on one memorable occasion a man 3 times his size who turned out to be drunk rather than criminal, which made the confrontation both louder and more confused than it needed to be. 3p is a lot of money when you're counting in pennies, but the alternative is navigating London alone, which you have done and can do, but which costs you time and energy, and occasionally skin from falling over things that Danny would have warned you about. The economics of being blind in 1880s London. Nobody teaches you this. Nobody sits you down and explains the arithmetic of disability. You work it out yourself, slowly, the way you work out everything now, by feel. A fiddle player in a good position on a good day can earn between 8p and a shilling, 6p in bad weather, in a bad position, on a day when people are walking fast with their heads down and their hands in their pockets. The very best days. Market days in the right location, special events, the right weather in spring when people feel generous and the sun is doing something to their mood. You can earn a shilling and 6p, maybe 2 shillings. Those days happen. Not often, but they happen. You remember each one precisely. 4p for lodging, 3p for Danny, a penny for food if you eat once, 2p if you eat twice, which is the right number of times to eat in a day. That means you need to earn 8p minimum to break even, and a shilling to eat properly, every single day, including Sunday, when the streets are quieter because the churches drain people away in the morning, and the shops are shut and the usual bustle of the city is replaced by something slower and more pious, which doesn't put coins in hats. 2 pennies. Today you're starting the day with 2 pennies, which means you're already short by 2p before you've played a single note. The thought settles into you not as despair. You've moved past the point where individual calculations feel like despair. They just feel like arithmetic now, but as information. You need 2p more just to stand still. Everything after that is eating. The fog closes around you both as you walk north. Waterloo Road is full of the morning sounds of the working city. The bread carts, the milk carts, The metal churns clanking against each other, which you know immediately from the sound, a high metallic clatter that bounces off the buildings in a distinctive way. A newspaper seller, not yet shouting, too early, the papers barely in his hands, sitting on a box near the entrance to a coffee house. The coffee house itself open and warm, the smell of it reaching you from 15 feet away. Ground coffee, which in the 1880s is not so much a luxury as a kind of daily necessity for anyone who needs to be awake and working and has a penny to spend. You can't afford the coffee house. You note its existence the way you note all warm places, with a kind of geographical affection, the way a sailor notes a harbour he can't enter. Careful, Danny says, and your left foot comes down on the edge of a drainage channel instead of in the middle of it, which is the difference between a stumble and a fall. They dug it out yesterday for the new pipe. Is it marked? There's a board. You wouldn't know. Obviously I wouldn't know. That's why you're here. Danny makes a sound that might be a laugh. It's one of his few sounds. The streets are getting busier as you move north. Waterloo Road feeding into the approach to the bridge, which is where the traffic thickens. Carts from the south side needing to cross to the city, and the north bank sending its own traffic back, and the pedestrians threading between all of it with the particular fatalism of people who have been navigating London traffic for decades and have developed a kind of aggressive trust that things will move around them. You don't have that trust, or rather, you have it in some places and not others, and Waterloo Bridge approach is not one of the places. What's the pitch situation, you ask Danny. Danny's quiet for a moment, which means he's looking. This is one of the arrangements that has evolved between you over the months. When you ask him about conditions, he looks before he speaks. He doesn't just tell you what he assumes or what was true yesterday. He looks right now and tells you what he sees. 2 men on the corner of Wellington Street, he says. One with a concertina, one I don't know. What's the one you don't know playing? He hasn't started yet. He's tuning something. Accordion, probably. Their end is getting crowded. Old Silas is outside the theatre. Savoy theatre side. You pause. The Savoy's not open yet. No, but the stage door has people. There's a delivery. Silas. Blind Silas. You'd have to deal with that. Where else? There's good spot by the newsagent on Exeter Street. Man's usually there, but I don't see him. What man? Big man, barrel organ. Sometimes a monkey on a chain. A monkey? A small one. I'm aware that monkeys tend not to be large. He's not there, Danny says, ignoring this. Could be sick. Could be arrested. Could have gone south. Gone south where? South of the river, back across. Like me. You're not from south of the river. I'm from Birmingham. Which isn't from here at all, Danny says, with the particular confidence of someone born within sight of St. Paul's, who regards anyone not born within sight of St. Paul's as coming from a slightly theoretical place. He's not wrong exactly. You are from somewhere else. You feel it every day. But you've stopped feeling it as a wound and started feeling it as a fact, which is different. You reach the Strand at 7:10. The Strand in the morning. You've memorised the sound of it the way you've memorised everything important, by standing still and letting it arrive. It has a specific acoustic, a specific quality. The buildings on both sides are tall enough to create a channel, and the channel amplifies the sound of the traffic and the people and the wind into something with shape to it. You can hear the space. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't needed to do this. But the Strand sounds different from Wellington Street, sounds different from Exeter Street, sounds different from the Embankment, and you know all of these differences now the way a musician knows the difference between concert halls. the way the sound bounces off the back wall, the way it fills or doesn't fill, the way certain notes carry and others don't. The Strand in November at 7 in the morning smells of coal smoke and damp wool, and the coffee houses that are opening along its length and the particular sharpness of newsprint. The morning papers being sold from a dozen different spots, all of it mixing in the fog with the horse smell and the river smell drifting up from the embankment below. A city announcing itself. "Silas," Danny says, "you'd been expecting this." Blind Silas. Silas Makepeace, though almost no one uses that name, has been playing on the Strand since before you were born. He arrived in London in approximately 1851, at the age of 17 from somewhere in Suffolk. That's what he claims. You've never entirely believed the 1851 part because Silas adjusts his history depending on what it needs to do at any given moment. But the Suffolk part you believe, because occasionally when he's drunk or tired, the vowels shift and something rural comes through. He is, in the precise technical language of the street musicians world, your problem. Not because he's unfriendly. He's not exactly friendly either, but unfriendly isn't the word. Silas is your problem because he's been here longer than you, knows more than you, and has opinions about pitch and territory that are enforced not by any formal law, but by the simple fact that other musicians respect them. A new man moving in on a patch that Silas has worked for 30 years isn't breaking the law. He's just making an enemy. And enemies in a world this small and this dependent on the goodwill of the people around you are the one thing you genuinely can't afford. "Where is he?" you ask Danny. "Exeter Street corner, outside the newsagent." Your spot, or the spot you'd been thinking of as yours, which is a different thing but feels the same from the inside. Is he playing? Just got his case out. Then he was here first, by about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. You'd been 10 minutes too slow, and now Silas had the corner. The best corner on the Strand approach. The corner where the morning foot traffic from Waterloo and Waterloo Road fanned out across the Strand, where there was a natural pause point because of the crossing from Wellington Street, where the acoustic was good. The building line created a slight alcove effect, and your fiddle sounded better there than almost anywhere else you'd tried in the past 7 months. 10 minutes. "Right," you say. You stand on the pavement for a moment thinking. Danny waits. This is one of the things about Danny that you've come to value. He knows when you're thinking and he doesn't interrupt it with suggestions. He just waits. He probably looks around for other hazards. He might be eating something. You've learned not to ask. 10 minutes is nothing. You can't argue with 10 minutes. You can't argue with Silas at all, not really, because he's been here since 1851, and your 7 months is nothing in his arithmetic. What you can do is find somewhere else. The embankment, you say. Danny's quiet for a moment. Not thinking quiet. Something else. What? "It's cold by the river," he says. "It's cold everywhere. It's cold in the wind by the river. Different kind of cold." "I know what kind of cold it is by the river. Your fingers." "My fingers will be fine." Danny is quiet again. Then, "All right. You've been to the embankment before. The Victoria Embankment, built by the Metropolitan Board of Works engineer Joseph Bazalgette, opened in 1870 along the north bank of the Thames from Westminster Bridge to Blackfriars Bridge. 13 years old as of this November. Still feels new by London's standards, which measures newness in centuries rather than decades. Wide, flat, wind exposed, lined with trees that are mostly bare now in November, with the river right beside it, and nothing between you and the water except a low wall. The acoustic on the embankment is not ideal. There's too much open space. The sound goes sideways and up instead of being caught and directed. But the foot traffic is good on certain parts of it, and there are moments in the day when it works. The morning commuters walking from the south side ferry crossings toward the city, the lunchtime promenaders who come down from the Strand when the weather is bearable. Today is November. The weather is not particularly bearable, but you have 2 pennies and 4 pence to find. You walk to the embankment with Danny's hand on your arm, down a series of streets you've learned by texture and sound, past the smell of a fried fish shop that isn't open yet, but whose fat has soaked into the walls, past a churchyard where the grass is wet and the gate hinges need oiling. You know the gate from its sound, a specific metallic complaint, and down the steps to the lower level of the embankment, where the river air hits you immediately, and Danny's prediction proves exactly correct. The cold by the river is a different kind of cold. London cold in November is already wet and penetrating, the kind that doesn't announce itself the way honest winter cold does, but seeps in gradually through wool and leather until it's sitting inside your joints. River cold is all of that, plus a specific dampness from the water itself, plus the wind that has been coming up from the east and has nothing to stop it across a full width of river. And under all of it, the smell of the Thames. The Thames at low tide smells of mud and old water and the specific combination of industrial runoff and sewage that Bazalgette's great sewer system has theoretically improved but not eliminated. It's better than it was 20 years ago. You've been told this, repeatedly, by people who were here before the sewer works, who tell you about the great stink of 1858, with the kind of conversational relish that suggests both pride at surviving it and a slight wish that their audience had been there to appreciate it properly. Better than 20 years ago, but still emphatically the Thames. Salt, mud, coal dust, fish that has been dead for varying lengths of time, the particular sharpness of river water on a cold morning. Something almost mineral. You breathe it in and let your lungs adjust. Where? You ask Danny. He guides you to the position he's identified. You can feel from the air movement and the sound reflection that you're standing with the river about 30 feet to your right, the embankment wall behind you, trees somewhere to your left, bare branches, the sound of the wind in them different from the sound of the wind without them, the buildings of the Strand on the hill above, below the embankment walkway, and the people moving along it. Not many people right now. It's early, and it's cold, and the fog is still sitting on the river in a way you can hear. Sound muffled, compressed, the water invisible. You unstrap the fiddle case. This is a ritual. Every morning. Even on bad mornings. Even on mornings when your hands are cold and your body aches from the cot, and you've eaten half a piece of stale bread and your boots are damp from yesterday. Even then, the act of opening the case and taking out the fiddle has something in it that the rest of the morning does not. The case is old. Black leather, worn smooth on the corners, with a small paper label inside that says W. Briggs, 14 Stratford Road, Birmingham, in your grandfather's handwriting, which you can't see but know is there because you know the texture of it under your fingertip. The paper has gone soft with age and the pencil has almost worn away, but if you press your finger to it you can feel the slight indentations of letters. Inside the case, the fiddle, maple and spruce, light enough to feel fragile, substantial enough to know it isn't. A slight crack in the varnish on the lower bout that your grandfather repaired with something that's held for 40 years. The scroll at the head of the neck, which your grandfather said his teacher's teacher had carved. A claim you've never had reason to doubt or verify. 4 steel strings, not gut, not anymore, steel lasts longer in the damp, tuned to E, A, D, G from the top down, the E string so close to the edge of the fingerboard that playing in high positions requires more care than it should. You rosined the bow last night. The cake of rosin in your pocket, a fragment, not much left. You'll need to replace it soon, and rosin costs 3p. Is slightly warm from your body heat. The bow itself, horsehair tightened to the right tension, not too taut, not too loose, which you test by pressing your thumb against the middle of the hair and feeling the resistance. Right. You tuck the violin under your chin, the cold wood against your jaw, that specific temperature differential between the wood and your skin, the weight of the instrument just over a pound, which is nothing and everything, the weight shifting as you settle into position, your left hand finding the neck, your fingers settling into first position, not consciously, just landing where they belong the way they've landed 10,000 times. You draw the bow across the A string, the note comes out flat, cold. The string has been cold in the case since last night, and it needs a few minutes. You play an open fifth, A and E together, and listen to the beating frequency that tells you the strings are slightly out of tune, then adjust the A peg fractionally, less than a quarter turn, until the beating slows and stops. D next, G last, the heavy string that always needs more time to stabilize. This takes 4 minutes. You don't rush it. You never rush it. Danny is standing beside you, hat in hand, a flat cap turned upside down that cost a penny halfpenny at a second-hand market off the cut. He places it on the pavement in front of you. You play a scale, just a scale, G major, 1 octave, slowly. Listening to the tone, listening to the intonation, feeling the resistance of the strings under your fingers, cold strings, everything slightly stiff and reluctant, but it's there. The sound is there. You can feel it vibrating up through the strings and into the wood and into your chin and your chest. Then you begin. The piece is a jig. You don't know who wrote it. Your grandfather couldn't tell you when you were small and learning by watching his hands, and whoever told him couldn't tell him either. It exists in the tradition the way a lot of things exist in the tradition, without origin, without ownership, belonging to anyone who can play it. In G major, 3/4 time, bright and quick, and with a particular turn in the second bar that your grandfather played differently from the way you play it, and that sounds better your way even if you wouldn't say that out loud. The notes go into the foggy November air above the Thames and disappear. No one stops, not yet. This is part of the reality of street music that no one who hasn't done it understands. The first minutes are always nothing. People walk past. They don't look, or they look and keep walking, or they look, and the look says something unpleasant about how they feel about their morning being interrupted by a fiddle in the cold. You learn not to take it personally. You can't afford to take it personally. The moment you start adjusting your playing to the immediate audience, playing louder when no one's there, quieter when people are looking uncomfortable, you've lost something. You play as if someone excellent is listening, because the day you stop doing that is the day it starts sounding like no one excellent is there. Your grandfather told you this. Not about street music, about music generally. He'd never done what you're doing, but the principle holds. 5 minutes, 8 minutes, a pair of boots that slow near you and then accelerate. A pause 3 feet away that might be contemplation or might be someone waiting for a break in the traffic. A single coin landing in the hat with the specific sound of a farthing. A small coin, the smallest coin, a quarter of a penny, followed by footsteps continuing. A farthing. You've been playing for 10 minutes in the November cold on the Thames embankment, and someone has given you the smallest coin in British circulation. You play the jig again. Let me tell you about music in 1883 London, because this is important for understanding not just what you do, but why it matters, and what it costs, and what it means in the particular world you inhabit. London in 1883 is, by any measure, a musical city. The concert halls in the West End, St James's Hall in Piccadilly, which has held audiences of over 2,000 and whose acoustics are considered among the finest in Europe. The Crystal Palace in Sydenham, which has a capacity of nearly 4,000, and whose Saturday concerts under August Manns have been making classical music available to the middle classes for 30 years. The music halls, which are a different thing entirely, the Alhambra in Leicester Square, the Oxford Music Hall on Oxford Street, Collins's Music Hall in Islington, small halls in every borough, singing saloons attached to pubs, piano music drifting out of parlour windows, church choirs, amateur bands, street musicians. There are hundreds of street musicians in London, possibly thousands. Men with barrel organs, the penny organs, some of them with trained animals, the monkey with the hat being perhaps the most famous but by no means the only variation. Brass bands, often of dubious quality, often of questionable sobriety. German bands, groups of German immigrants who perform together in formations of between 4 and 8 musicians, who've been a fixture of London streets since the 1840s, and who are, it must be said, generally better than their reputation. Fiddlers, flautists, singers, both unaccompanied and with instrument, whistlers, men with concertinas, which are small and portable, and produce a sound somewhat like crying, which is appropriate given the circumstances under which most concertina players in 1880s London are performing. Then there are the blind musicians. Blindness and music in the Victorian era have a specific relationship. It's not coincidental. When you lose your sight, the social calculus of what you can do changes completely. Factory work, impossible in most configurations. Skilled trades that require visual precision, impossible. Casual labour, dangerous and often refused. The workhouse, possible. But the workhouse is a last resort that once entered reshapes your whole life, that takes from you the specific quality of independence that is the only thing that makes life different from mere existence. Music, in this context, is one of the options. If you have any talent, if you have the physical capacity, if you have the stamina for the streets, and the tolerance for rejection, and the mathematical brain for understanding that your income depends on hundreds of tiny transactions with strangers who have no obligation to give you anything at all. The parish charities help some blind men. The Royal Normal College for the Blind in Upper Norwood, founded 11 years ago in 1872, a school that teaches blind children to read Braille and do useful trades and perform music, takes children who are blind from birth or early childhood. You're too old for it. Were too old before you arrived in London, and the waiting list is long, and the cost, even after charity support, is not nothing. The Indigent Blind Visiting Society, the various church charities, they help sometimes. You've received 2 shillings in charitable disbursement over the past 7 months from a church off the Strand that runs a small fund for the blind poor. 2 shillings in 7 months, not enough to count on. What you have is the fiddle. What you have is the hours. What you have is the 2 pennies in your pocket and the 4pence you need, and the 6pence if you want to eat properly, and the 3pence for Danny and the arithmetic that says you need to stand here in the cold by the Thames and play until the coins outrun the need. The jig again. Then a hornpipe in D, quicker, with more ornamentation, the kind of playing that is harder in the cold, but that you've practiced so long it sits in your fingers rather than your brain. Your fingers know the hornpipe, even cold, even stiff, even on strings that want to go flat, your fingers know the hornpipe. A woman stops. You know she's stopped because the sound of her boots on the embankment flagstones pauses, and you hear the slight change in the air that means someone is standing still nearby rather than moving past. Then she speaks. "How much longer are you here for, dear?" The voice, middle-aged, well-spoken, not aristocratic, but the vowels of someone who's been educated carefully and has spent time in good company. A coat that probably cost money, you think, though you can't see it. But she smells of rose water and something more expensive underneath, and she's on the embankment in the morning in November, which means she's not someone who's hurrying to a factory. "Most of the day," you say, without stopping playing. "Oh." A pause. "I walk here most mornings. I hadn't seen you before. I'm usually on the Strand. My usual position was taken this morning. That's unfortunate." Another pause. The sound of a clasp. Her purse, opening. "You play very well." "Thank you." A coin lands in the hat. Not a farthing this time. You know immediately from the weight and the sound. The particular clear ring of a coin with some substance to it. Not a farthing's thin click, but something fuller. "Thank you," you say again. She says something else. It might be "good luck" or "good morning," words that blur at the edge of meaning, and her footsteps move away west along the embankment. Danny retrieves the coin and holds it up to you. "6pence," he says quietly. 6pence. A proper coin. The kind that makes a morning feel different. You play the hornpipe a second time, not because you need to, but because the fog is lifting slightly. You can tell from the way the sound is beginning to travel further, the slight clarification in the air, and the morning feels marginally less like an argument you're losing. 6pence brings you to 8pence total. 4pence for lodging, 3pence for Danny, a farthing left for food, which is not enough for food. You have, based on 30 minutes of playing in the cold by the Thames in November, earned enough to break even and not enough to eat. London will not be congratulating you on this achievement. The fog lifts as the morning progresses. Not all the way. London fog in November doesn't lift all the way. It just thins. But enough that the embankment acquires more foot traffic as the morning advances toward 9, then 9:30. The commuters who've already passed are replaced by the secondary wave, the clerks whose offices open at 9 rather than 8, the shop girls on their way to the big establishments on the Strand and Oxford Street, the domestic servants running errands before the household demands them back. A different composition of people than the earliest commuters, marginally more inclined to pause. You work through your repertoire, the jig, the hornpipe, a waltz in a major, slower, more sentimental, the kind of thing that appeals to people who are walking in pairs, a reel that your grandfather taught you, and that sits somewhere between Irish and something older, the origin lost in the generations of hands that have played it. A slow air, which you play rarely because it requires stillness and space, and this is not a stillness and space kind of morning, but occasionally it catches someone in the right mood. By the time the church bells, you can hear them distantly, the various churches of the Strand vicinity, which have a complicated relationship with each other's timing, that results in the bells arriving in overlapping waves rather than a single coherent announcement. Ring 10 o'clock, you've earned. Sixpence from the woman, twopence halfpenny from 9 separate transactions. One of them a halfpenny, 3 farthings, a penny, a halfpenny, another halfpenny, another penny. The arithmetic of very small amounts. The halfpenny is the most common denomination. People carrying halfpennies in their pockets feel the weight of them as something they can spare, something too small to matter, something that becomes a coin in a hat without quite registering as a real expenditure, which is why halfpennies matter enormously to the people collecting them. Total, 8pence halfpenny. An hour and a half of playing in the November cold. Time? You asked Danny. 10:15. Right, let's go to the Strand. The morning has moved far enough that the question of Silas's territory becomes moot, or at least different. By 10 in the morning, the prime morning position has played itself out. The rush has passed. The Strand in mid-morning is a different proposition from the Strand at 7, and the pitch calculus changes accordingly. It was at this point, mid-morning on the walk from the embankment back up to the Strand, that you first properly met Silas Makepeace. Not for the first time, of course. You'd been aware of each other for months in the way that street musicians in the same area are always aware of each other. A kind of acoustic awareness as much as anything else. You knew his sound. He played an organ, not a barrel organ, not one of those mechanical grinding things that play whether or not the operator is skilled, but a small hand-cranked instrument he'd had, by his own account, for 23 years. It had a sound, distinctive, the particular reedy warmth of a well-maintained small organ, slightly nasal on the high end, full enough in the middle register that it filled a street corner in a way a fiddle couldn't. You'd heard his sound before you heard his voice. You'd mapped his territory by sound before you met him by conversation. The meeting was on a Tuesday morning in early October. You'd gone too far west along the Strand into his patch. Accidentally, you'd thought you were still east of his usual position, and his voice had come out of a doorway with a directness that was almost impressive. "That's my corner, son." Not aggressive, not hostile, matter of fact, the way you'd tell someone they were sitting in your usual chair at a pub. Not angry, just informational. "Sorry," you'd said. "I wasn't sure where I was." A pause. Then, "You're the blind fiddler from Stamford Street." It wasn't a question. Your lodging house, apparently, was an established geographical reference for the blind musician community, which was smaller and more interconnected than you'd realised. "Tom Briggs," you said. "Silas Makepeace." Another pause. He was doing something with his organ. You could hear the particular sound of the case being adjusted. "You any good?" "Good enough." Good enough isn't the standard. Can you play through the night and through the cold and through the days when nobody stops and still have something to give when someone finally does? You thought about this seriously. "I don't know yet," you said. 7 months isn't long enough to know. Silas made a sound that might have been approval. Honest answer, "Buy you a cup of tea?" And that was how you met old Silas. The tea happened at a coffee house near the end of the Strand, the kind that charges a penny for a cup and doesn't ask you to leave for an hour. Silas drank his with 2 sugars, which he brought himself in a small paper twist. He'd been doing this so long, he said, that he automatically prepared the twist every morning, and it would feel wrong not to. "You want to know the territory," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to not step on yours." "That's the same thing, but politer." He drank his tea. "You've been working the embankment mornings when the Strand spots are taken." "That's sensible. The embankment is secondary pitch. Better in summer, worse in winter. Weather makes all the difference. The Strand is primary pitch. Primary pitch has competition. Competition has to be managed. How do you manage it? Respect and timing. I'm on the Strand from 7 to noon on good days, from 8 to noon when it's cold or wet because no amount of money's worth my fingers going. After noon I move east toward Aldwych, which is mine too, and which you might want to note. After 3 in the afternoon, the upper Strand is free for you if you want it. Silas, I'm not done. He wasn't unkind about it, just focused. The German band works the Strand between noon and 2, roughly, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They're decent musicians and they're on a pitch agreement with the shopkeepers, so you can't argue with them even if you wanted to. The man with the barrel organ, Walsh his name is, you'll hear him before you smell him, which is saying something. Walsh has Sundays on the western end. Give him his Sundays. He's had them since 1875. That's a long time. 8 years is nothing, Silas said, with the certainty of a man who's been doing this for 32. You're thinking in the wrong unit of time. A pitch that's held for less than a decade is a new pitch. What's your oldest pitch? The corner I had this morning. Had it since 1856. A pause. Actually, I had it since 1856. Lost it for 3 years in the early 60s because I was ill and couldn't work it and someone else moved in. Got it back in 64. Another pause. It's mine now in the way that streets are the cities. Not because any paper says so, but because anyone who's been here long enough knows that it is. You turned your cup around in your hands thinking about that. You were ill, you said. Fever. Took my sight too before you ask. Born sighted. Went blind at 15. He said it the way he might say he had bad teeth. A fact. Part of the landscape of his life, not a tragedy requiring comment. What did you do first, before the streets? Worked in a brush factory. Good money, actually, for a blind man in 1851. They needed someone to do the sorting by touch, and I was faster than anyone sighted. But the brush factory closed. Owner died. Son didn't want it. Went to 3 other shops after that. None of them lasted. He set his cup down. Streets last. Streets always last. As long as London has people walking on them, and enough of them have a penny to spare, the streets last. Has it been enough, over the years? Silas was quiet for a moment. Enough to live, he said finally. Enough to eat and sleep indoors. Some years better than others. Some years, he trailed off. Then, the year of the long winter, 1878. You'd have been, 16? 16. In Birmingham, you don't know what that winter was here. Streets iced for 6 weeks. Couldn't stand outside without losing feeling in your hands in 20 minutes. No earning on the streets for 6 weeks means no lodging. I slept in doorways for 11 days before the church found a spot for me. A pause. Not the worst thing that's happened to me, but notable. You'd never heard anyone describe sleeping in doorways for 11 days as notable before. This was the first lesson Silas gave you. Not about music, about calibration, about what the scale of hardship looked like when you'd been doing this long enough to have real reference points. Your 7 months felt, in the light of Silas's 32 years, very small. He gave you the Strand after 3 in the afternoon just as he'd offered. He gave you the embankment mornings without territorial claim, because the embankment had never been his and he didn't want it. He gave you a slow, oblique education in the geography of earning in central London that over the following weeks and months reshaped how you thought about the city. And today, standing at the foot of the Strand approach at 10:15, You know that Silas's morning is running out. By 11, the prime morning pitch belongs to whoever gets there. He's still there, Danny says. On the corner. Left the corner. He's moving east. Is he? He's going toward Aldwych, his afternoon patch. Which means the corner is free. You don't run. Running in the street without sight is a specific invitation to catastrophe. But you walk fast, Danny keeping pace, guiding you around a man standing in the middle of the pavement reading a newspaper, and around the drainage channel on the corner into the spot. The spot. It's not special to look at, you're told. Just a corner, same as 100 other corners. But you know it's acoustic. You know the way the buildings round it catch the sound and redirect it toward the pavement, the way it creates a natural listening space that you don't get in the open. You know the texture of the flagstones under your boots, slightly smoother here than on the embankment because more feet have worn them down over more decades. You know the slight shelter from the east wind that the angle of the building creates. You take off the fiddle case. By the time you're tuned and ready, a small clustering of people who happen to be near the same point while having individual reasons for being there has formed the specific gravitational field that a street musician creates. Not because you've started playing yet. Just because you're setting up. Because the act of a person taking out an instrument on a corner is a social signal, unconscious but real. Something is about to happen. Even people who won't stop when you play will briefly orient toward you when you take out the instrument you play. Not the jig this time. You've played the jig this morning, and the jig is best for cold weather and moving crowds. The Strand at mid-morning wants something different. Slower, more assured. Something that says, I'm not asking for your charity. I'm offering you something worth your time. There's a piece you learned at your grandfather's knee that has no name, or at least no name he ever gave it. Starts in G, moves to D major for the middle section, comes back to G but changed. Not the same G you started in, the same key, but something has happened inside the music, a shift of weight, a slight opening of emotion that the middle section closed off, and that the return resolves. Your grandfather played it at the end of every session, when people were tired and slightly drunk and the night had gone long enough that sentiment was acceptable. You play it now on the corner of the Strand in the November morning and let it go. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, the piece is longish. By the end of it, when the last note fades into the street noise, there are 6 people standing near you. You can tell from the sound of their breathing and their weight shifts and the slight changes in the air. One of them starts clapping, just briefly, 5 or 6 claps, the kind you give when you're slightly surprised. Then coins, not a fortune, never a fortune, but a penny, a halfpenny, another penny, a halfpenny, a halfpenny, a farthing. 6pence halfpenny from 6 people in 30 seconds. That's how it works. The right piece in the right place at the right moment can turn 6 minutes of music into 6pence. The wrong piece, the wrong place, the wrong moment, and 6 minutes yields a farthing. You thank the people, or rather you nod toward them, because speaking breaks the spell of the music, and some people prefer to give their coin and move on without interaction. The interaction creates an obligation they don't want, and you start the next piece. By noon, you've earned your original 8pence halfpenny from the embankment, plus 2 shillings and 3pence from the Strand corner between 11 and noon. Total, 3 shillings and a penny halfpenny. 3 shillings and a penny halfpenny. It's a good morning. Better than average. Let's be clear about what it means. 4pence for lodging, paid. 3pence for Danny, paid. 2pence for a reasonable meal at midday, paid. 2pence for another meal in the evening, paid. twopence halfpenny remaining savings. Saving twopence halfpenny on a 3-shilling morning, that's the margin. Not saving up for anything large, just the margin between a morning that works and a morning that doesn't. Danny goes off at noon with his 3p. He has other work in the afternoon. You've never asked exactly what, which is a deliberate choice, because knowing might create obligations you can't afford to have. He'll be back at 4. You eat at a coffee stall near Waterloo Bridge. Not a coffee house, no seats, no tables, just a covered cart with a gas burner and a man behind a counter who serves coffee and tea, and sometimes a kind of soup that is more hot water than anything else, but which is better than nothing. Soup. A penny. A roll. A halfpenny. You stand at the counter and eat. This is the standard. Stand in. In the 1880s, the idea of a man in your position, a street musician, a blind man, someone with 2p in his pocket and bread in his hand, sitting down to eat is not impossible, but it belongs to a different category of the day. There are places where you could sit. The common kitchen at the lodging house, which Mrs. Wicklow sometimes lets you use in the afternoon if it's not too busy. The benches at certain churchyards, in good weather, the embankment itself. But standing at a coffee stall is where you are right now, and the soup is hot and the roll is slightly fresh, and this is enough. This is exactly enough. The man at the coffee stall, whose name you don't know but whose voice you've learned over 4 months of midday stops, doesn't make conversation. Neither do the other people eating at the counter. A workman with paint on his hands smelling of turpentine, a clerk in a hurry with his change already out before he's finished ordering, an old woman with a market basket resting her feet. People who have learned that lunch is not an occasion but a function. You eat. You pay. You stand in the weak November sunlight. It's come through slightly now, the fog has gone, there's pale sun across the rooftops to the south. And you think about the afternoon. The afternoon is different from the morning. The morning has its routine, its established paths, its sense of working within a system. The afternoon opens up differently. The Strand is available, but the Strand in the afternoon has different people. Shoppers rather than commuters, women rather than city men, a different acoustic relationship to the pavement. Wellington Street sometimes, heading south toward the river. Or sometimes you go east. Not the real East End, not Whitechapel, not Stepney, not the docks, but east relative to the Strand. Eastward along Fleet Street and into the approaches of the city, where the counting houses and the banks and the insurance offices create a different stream of foot traffic than the West End. Clerks and traders and the various classes of men who make the financial machinery work. Silas had told you about this stretch early on. Fleet Street in the afternoon, any weekday, he'd said. After 2, the city men come out. Some of them have had good mornings and they're generous. Some of them have had bad mornings and they're looking for something that doesn't remind them of bad mornings. Music that isn't about money goes well there. Don't play reels and jigs. Play something that sounds like before they came to London, or before they became what they are. Something that sounds like a field. Something that sounds like a field. You'd thought about this for a long time after Silas said it. You grew up in Birmingham, not a field. But your grandfather was from the countryside, from Staffordshire, from a village outside Stafford, and the music he'd taught you had that quality Silas described. The slow airs especially, the unnamed piece, things that sounded like they'd come from somewhere before streets and commerce and counting houses, before the city. The city men, in your experience, fall into 2 categories when it comes to street music. The first category stops and listens, not for long, a minute, maybe 2, but properly with genuine attention. This is the category that sometimes gives a shilling and sometimes gives sixpence, and once gave you a florin, which is 2 shillings, the most you've ever received in a single transaction, from a man with a voice so deep and deliberate it sounded like something from the bottom of a well, who said only very fine, and walked away. The second category walks past with the specific city man walk, purposeful, slightly aggressive in its purposefulness, the walk of a man who has decided that the street is a thoroughfare and not a place where things happen, and who is going to enforce that decision through velocity. Neither category is wrong exactly. The first category gives you money. The second category reminds you that most of the city, most of the time, doesn't need what you're offering. But you don't think about the second category. The second category is just weather. You think about the first category and you play for them even when they're not there yet. Because the first category tends to arrive when the playing is good. The afternoon in Fleet Street goes reasonably, 1 shilling and 2pence from 2 hours of playing, which brings your day total to 4 shillings and 3pence halfpenny by the time Danny arrives at 4 to take you home. 4 shillings and 3pence halfpenny on a day that started with 2 pennies and the certainty that you were short. It's not wealth. It's not even stability. But it's the right side of the line between a day that works and a day that doesn't. And in London in 1883, that line is where everything lives. Danny guides you back south through the crowds of late afternoon Fleet Street, the counter-rush of the day turning around, the people who came in at 8 going back out now, the papers in their arms and the counting-house weariness in their walk, across the bridge and back to Stamford Street, where Mrs. Wicklow is in the kitchen, and Parliament the terrier greets you with the specific kind of enthusiasm that means he's been fed recently and is feeling generous about it. You pay Mrs. Wicklow a 4pence. She takes it without comment and hands you a mug of tea. "Good day?" she asks. "Good enough." Silas was on the corner till past 11. "I know." You manage. Embankment first, Strand after. She makes the sound she makes when she's reassessing a previous low estimate. Not a compliment exactly. A recalibration. Parliament puts his head on your knee. The tea is as thin as always. You drink it all. That evening, after the simple supper of bread and dripping, Mrs. Wicklow's Wednesday offering done in the back kitchen while 3 other lodgers eat at the long table, you sit for an hour in the common room and think about London. This is something you do. You think about London as a spatial problem that requires constant updating. The streets you know, the streets you don't know, the routes between pitches, the obstacles that change, roadworks, temporary market stalls, delivery vehicles that park in unexpected places, and the obstacles that are permanent, the acoustic properties of different streets at different times of day, the way sound travels on damp days versus dry days, the particular reverb of Waterloo Bridge at night when there's no traffic, which you've experienced a few times and which you keep in your memory as a kind of sonic landmark, the way a sailor keeps a star. You think about the places you haven't been yet. In 7 months in London, you've mapped the area between Waterloo and the Strand and Fleet Street with something approaching completeness. But London is much larger than this. You know this from Silas, from Mrs. Wicklow, from the conversations in the lodging house. The city proper, the West End, proper West End, not just the eastern end of the Strand, but Piccadilly and Regent Street and Hyde Park. North London, which is another world entirely. The East End, which is yet another world again, older and rougher and with its own economy of streets. Silas has been to all of these places. Silas knows the acoustic properties of a dozen different London squares, the foot traffic patterns of 30 different streets. the particular qualities of a dozen different seasons in a dozen different parts of the city. You have 7 months. There is a man in the common room tonight, sitting in the chair nearest the fire, which he always claims by arriving first because he's in construction work and starts early and finishes early, called Henry. Not his actual name, which is Jeremiah, but Jeremiah refuses to respond to Jeremiah, so everyone has stopped using it. Henry is broad and quiet and from Worcestershire, and he has been in London for 19 years and has lived in this lodging house for 11 of them. Where are the best busking spots in the city, you'd asked him once, early on in your time here. Henry had thought about this for a long time. He thinks about questions the way you play warm-up scales, methodically, without rushing. Depends what you want, he said. Most people, Regent Street, between Oxford Circus and Piccadilly Circus. Wide pavement, lots of people, mix of classes. Money in the morning coming into the shops, money in the afternoon coming out. But it's prime pitch, and you'll have trouble from the constables. Because of the Act, the Metropolitan Streets Act of 1867. You'd learned about this quickly. Any 2 householders could make a complaint about a street musician, and the police were required to move them on. In practice, the police on any given street interpreted this with varying degrees of enthusiasm, depending on the weather, their mood, and the general quality of your music. But it was the law, and ignoring it had consequences. Because of the Act and because of the competition, Henry said, German bands have most of Regent Street. Organised. They pay the constables. Don't ask me how, I don't ask. And they work in rotation so no one complains they're always there. For a lone man, you'd be moved on inside an hour. Oxford Street. Better. East end of Oxford Street, near Oxford Circus. The shops there draw a middle-class crowd. Women mostly. Shopping. And women are generally more inclined to stop than men. But the pavements are busy and you have to be good, not just adequate. People on Oxford Street have been to concerts. They know what good sounds like. And in winter? Henry had paused. In winter, he said carefully, the honest answer is you earn less everywhere. Everyone earns less in winter. The difference is whether you can hold on until spring. Holding on until spring, that was the phrase that stayed with you. Not earning more, not finding better positions, just holding on, not losing ground. Surviving the gap between November and March, the 4 months when the cold reduces the foot traffic, and the fog reduces people's willingness to stop, and the dark reduces the hours when you can safely be on the streets. You were thinking about spring already, and it was November. The common room begins to fill in the late evening. The lodging house has 23 regular residents and a few occasional ones. Men who come for a week or 2 and then move on. Part of the constant movement of London's poor. The men who come for seasonal work and go again. Who drift between cities, between lodging houses, between the edge of employment and the edge of the workhouse, with the specific fatalistic optimism of people who have decided to outlast the circumstances rather than solve them. The man in the corner, a new one, arrived yesterday, whose name you don't know yet, is from Suffolk. You know this from his voice, a particular flatness of vowel, a specific way of saying no, that you've only heard from people who grew up near the water on the East Coast. He's in London looking for dock work, which is the most common reason Suffolk men come to London, and which has roughly a 1 in 3 chance of actually resulting in dock work in any given week. You the fiddle man? He asks when the conversation in the room has the particular quality of an evening where people are talking. Not because they have things to say, but because the silence is unfriendly. Tom Briggs. Yes. Where do you play? Strand mainly, Embankment sometimes. Good money there? Depends on the day. He's quiet for a moment. Then, I heard a man play fiddle once, on the street in Ipswich. He'd been a sailor, lost the last 2 fingers on his left hand to frostbite, and played the fiddle to make up the difference. How did he manage? Adapted the fingering, different positions. Took him 2 years to relearn it. Couldn't do the highest positions, but everything below the third was fine. A pause. I gave him a penny. Seemed like I should. You should, you said. The conversation drifted away after that, as conversations in common rooms do, dissolving into other conversations, other subjects. The fire in the stove crackled. Someone started snoring already. Remarkable early, given that it was barely 8 o'clock. And Parliament the terrier moved from your feet to someone else's feet. His loyalty measured in warmth. You thought about the sailor with the frostbitten fingers. 2 years to relearn the fiddle. 2 years of sitting in somewhere, Ipswich presumably somewhere near the water, working through the same positions you'd work through, finding the places where the adapted technique almost worked, where it needed more work, where it would never be quite right. You thought about the first 6 months after you lost your sight, the sitting in a room, the wall that felt like it had moved in when the lights went out and had never moved back. You thought about the day you picked up the fiddle again. Everyone who has lost something and found something else on the other side of the loss has that day. The pivot day. The day you stop measuring time by what came before and start measuring it by what comes after. For you it was a Tuesday in January, the month after the accident, the winter of 1879, when your aunt went out to the market and you were left alone in the front room with the silence and the dark and the fiddle sitting in the corner. You'd picked it up without intending to, or you'd intended it in the way that intentions work when you're not paying attention to them. Sat down on the chair your aunt kept by the window and put the fiddle under your chin. The first note you played was G, open G, the lowest string. No fingering required, just the bow on the string and then the note. The note happened. It happened in your body. Not just in the air, that had always been true, but in a specific physical way that you hadn't noticed before. The vibration of the wood against your jaw and your collarbone, the resonance of the instrument communicating directly to your chest. You'd always felt this to some degree, but with nothing to look at, no room to place you in space, no visual context to dilute the experience. Just the note and your body. It was different. You stayed in that chair for 3 hours and played everything you knew. The following day, your aunt found the fiddle in your hands when she came downstairs in the morning. She didn't ask about it. She made tea. She said, "Your grandfather would have said, 'Keep at it.'" And she went to work. Keep at it. 3 years and 7 months later, you're sitting in a lodging house on Stamford Street in London, with 4 shillings and 4pence in your pocket, and 83 regular pieces in your repertoire, and a working knowledge of the acoustic properties of approximately 40 different London street locations. Keep at it. The October fog comes earlier than usual that year. The November fog is worse. Fog has texture in London. This is something you learn very quickly when fog is not a visual phenomenon for you, but an atmospheric one. Something that changes the weight and direction of sound, that alters the temperature by 2 or 3 degrees, that presses the smell of the city down closer to ground level instead of letting it rise. The coal smoke that would normally drift upward into the Victorian sky instead settles, mixes, thickens. By November, the fog can sit for days, sometimes most of a week, before a wind comes from the west and clears it. Playing in fog is difficult for different reasons than the obvious. The acoustic changes, sound muffles, the very quality that makes music on a street corner work. The way sound can carry 20 feet to catch a passing ear gets reduced. You have to play louder to achieve the same penetration, and playing louder for 8 hours a day does things to your bow arm that you spend the evening paying for. Your right arm, the bow arm, aches by mid-November in a specific way. The forearm, from the elbow to the wrist, a deep fatigue that sits in the muscle and doesn't entirely leave with a night's rest. This is not injury. You've learned the difference between injury and fatigue, the way you've learned the difference between a string going flat and a string going wrong. But it's information. It's your body telling you about load and limits. Silas, when you mentioned this, was unsympathetic in the way that contains actual information. You're gripping the bow, he said. When you're tired, you grip it to compensate for the tiredness, and gripping it makes you more tired. I don't think I'm gripping it. You don't feel it because it's become automatic. Fatigue compensations always become automatic. You need to practice relaxing it while tired. Practice relaxing. Practice feeling the difference between your hand at the beginning of the day and your hand at the end of the day. Then try to make them feel the same. This is either very profound advice or very obvious advice. You've been thinking about it for 2 months and haven't entirely decided which. Silas offers advice the way he offers his pitch schedule. Not generously exactly, but accurately. He doesn't say things for the sake of saying them. Every piece of information he gives you has been earned, has been tested, is something that he knows from experience to be true. This is rarer than you might expect among people who dispense advice. Most people, most well-meaning people who know things, give you their knowledge wrapped in reassurance, rounded at the edges, adjusted for optimism. Silas's knowledge comes without wrapping. It's sometimes uncomfortable and almost always useful. He was born, as he's told you, in 1836, which makes him 47 this year. He carries his weight in his hands, which are broad and calloused in a specific way. Not the callousness of physical labour, but the particular toughening that comes from years of working the handle of the organ and the position in which he braces himself against the wind on street corners. He lost his sight to fever at 15. He was playing on the streets by 17. 30 years. He's seen London change in ways that you can only imagine. The building of the embankment, he played near it while Basil Get's men were working, he said. And the noise of construction was terrible, but the pay was good because there were so many workers to play to. The removal of the old markets, the expansion of the railways, the gradual electrification of the West End, not yet widespread but beginning, the first arc lamps appearing on certain streets, which he knows about not from sight but from the way the light changes the acoustic response of the buildings. What does electric light sound like? You asked him once because you'd been told it existed but hadn't been in a location where you could confirm it. He thought about this seriously, the way he thought about all serious questions. Different from gas, he said. Gas has a sound, the slight hiss, the particular quality of the yellow light on things that changes the visual texture of stone and brick. Arc lamps are quieter, harsher. People react differently to them. I don't know how to explain what I mean by that. They react differently. You stored this away, the way you stored everything Silas told you. One Tuesday in November, the fog so thick that you spent the morning hour on the embankment earning sixpence from a handful of transactions and feeling that the fog had physically reduced the world to a circle of 10 feet around you. Silas found you, at midday, at the coffee stall, and asked if you wanted to come east with him. East, into the city. Not the East End, but Cheapside, which runs east from St. Paul's into the heart of the old financial district, and which is a part of London you haven't properly explored. Why? You asked. Tradition, Silas said, which was not an answer but was, in the register of Silas's communication, a kind of answer. He meant, there are things I want to show you that can only be shown by taking you to them, and I'm choosing to take you there, which means the reasons are probably good enough. Danny guided you both. Danny had been asked before to guide Silas on the rare occasions when Silas needed a guide. Silas, after 30 years, needed very little guidance on his regular routes, but occasionally went somewhere outside his territory. And the three of you walked east together in the November fog, Silas's organ on his back and your fiddle on yours and Danny between you, navigating. Cheapside. You knew it existed. Silas had mentioned it, but you didn't know its sound. The sound of Cheapside is different from the sound of the Strand. The Strand is wide and its sound reflects off both sides, creating a kind of corridor effect. Cheapside is narrower in places, not everywhere, but the old section near St. Paul's is tighter, and the age of the buildings means the acoustics are different. Older stone, older brick. The particular resonance of a street that has been a street since before the Strand was properly a street. St. Paul's. You'd been near St. Paul's before, but not this close, not stopped, not with time to stand and listen. Silas stopped at the steps. "Stand here," he said. You stood. Danny shifted beside you, probably looking around. "What do you hear?" Silas asked. You listened. The traffic on Cheapside to the west, the traffic on Cannon Street to the south, the foot traffic on the steps, people going in and out of the cathedral, the soft authority of stone steps under hard shoes, and then, from inside, or maybe from the stone itself, which is 4 feet thick in places, a quality of resonance that is different from the street. The building itself seemed to be holding something, a frequency, a deep sub-bass frequency that was more felt than heard, more present in the chest than the ears, the way very large stone structures in very cold weather seem to hum. "You feel it?" Silas asked. "Yes." Wren's work, built after the fire, the dome, a pause. "I can't see it, neither can you, but I know it's there from this. From this. From the feeling of it in the chest. The acoustic signature of a dome 365 feet high. The height of the cross at the very top, which was finished in 1708. In the cold November air, making the city do something it didn't do elsewhere. "I come here twice a year," Silas said. "I don't play here. I just stand here." "Why twice?" "Once in summer, once in winter, to hear the difference." You stood there for 10 minutes. Danny stood beside you with the particular patience of a 10-year-old who's been asked to wait for something he doesn't understand, but who has learned that with you and Silas, the things he doesn't understand are usually worth waiting for. "The cathedral was rebuilt on the same ground as the old one," Silas said eventually, "which burned in the fire, which was on the ground of an older church before that. There have been churches on this hill since the 7th century. Since 604 AD. Approximately." He said it the way he said anything you'd verified. Not confirming, not denying, just filing. "And they've always built here. They've always built here. The hill is real. You can feel the slope even now. The original builders chose high ground. Then everyone since built on top of what they left." A pause. "There's a lesson in that. I don't know what the lesson is exactly, but there's one in there. You've thought about this periodically since." the lesson that's in there, the continuity of the hill, the ground itself as a kind of persistence, the ways that things built by dead people continue to shape the lives of people who never knew them, your grandfather's fiddle. The streets of London that Bazalgette rebuilt on top of the streets that the Romans built on top of the ground that was there before any of them. The things you inherit without choosing to. The things that shape you without your consent. Let me tell you about the music hall. You knew about the music halls before you came to London. In Birmingham there were music halls. Slightly smaller, slightly less grand, but the same idea. A hall, an audience, a stage. Acts performing in rotation. A chairman calling each act in from his table at the front where he drank and smoked and commentated on the proceedings and kept the evening moving. In London, the music halls are a whole world. The Alhambra in Leicester Square, the Oxford Music Hall on Oxford Street, Collins's in Islington, Wilton's in the East End, the Canterbury in Lambeth just across the river from you, which had been going since 1852, and which could hold an audience of 1,500 in conditions that were, by the standards of the licensed venues, relatively comfortable, and by the standards of the lodging houses you inhabited, extremely comfortable. Music halls mattered to the blind musician community in a specific way that took you a while to understand. The halls employed musicians, not street musicians. The halls had regular orchestras, regular acts, regular performers under contract. The pay was real money. A performer at a mid-level music hall in 1883 might earn between 10 shillings and £2 a week depending on billing. The stars earned more, much more. None of this was accessible to you, not directly, not yet. But the music halls also had open nights. Nights when unknown performers could take the stage and try their luck. Not every hall, not every week, but it happened. The chairman would introduce an act. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a newcomer to our stage. Let's give a warm welcome to... And the audience would decide. A music hall audience in 1883 is not a gentle thing. They've paid there a penny or tuppence for the gallery, and they have opinions about what constitutes value for money, and they will tell you those opinions immediately and loudly and with specificity. A bad act gets shouted off the stage. An act that annoys the audience gets things thrown at it. An act that genuinely moves or delights the audience gets something that a street musician never gets. A crowd giving its full, undivided attention, and then applauding. You've been thinking about the music hall since the spring. Not as an immediate possibility, but as a direction. A place that the work was building toward, if it was building well enough. Silas, when you raised it, was not discouraging. He was realistic. Your fiddle playing is good enough, he said. Better than adequate. The question is whether it's right for the halls. What do you mean? The halls want something, not just quality, something specific. The acts that work, the singers, the comedians, the musicians, they all have a thing, a particular thing, a quality that the audience can grab onto. With a fiddle player, it needs to be very particular, not just good playing, something that makes this specific fiddle player different from every other fiddle player. And you think I don't have that. I think you might have it and not know what it is yet. This was, in the register of Silas's communication, a high compliment. You spent a week trying to figure out what it meant, what the thing was, what the quality was. You thought about it on the embankment in the mornings, running through pieces while the river wind pulled at the sound. You thought about it in Fleet Street afternoons, watching through your ears as the city men passed, catching the ones who stopped and trying to understand what they stopped for. You thought about it in the evenings, lying in the attic at Stamford Street with the sounds of the city coming through the walls. The piece without a name, the one from your grandfather, the one that started in G and moved to D and came back changed. People stopped for that one more than anything else. Not always, not reliably, but when they stopped for it, they stopped differently. Not the way they stopped for the hornpipe or the reel. Quick, cheerful, a coin and a nod and away. They stopped and waited until it finished. Some of them looked like they were somewhere else for the duration. That was the thing, maybe, the being somewhere else. The piece that took people out of the fog and the traffic and the November cold for 3.5 minutes and put them somewhere that felt different from where they'd been. You didn't know how to do that intentionally. It happened when it happened. But you were beginning to understand that the intentional version, the ability to create that effect at will in any conditions for any audience, was what separated the street musician from the music hall act. The visit to Wilton's happened on a Friday evening in late November. Wilton's Music Hall, in Grace's Alley, off the highway in Whitechapel. It's the oldest surviving music hall in Britain, though at this point in 1883 it doesn't know it's going to survive, it's just trying to, and its history is complicated and somewhat unlikely. Started as a public house music room in 1858. The current hall, rebuilt and expanded to seat over 1,000 people, opened in 1859. The neighbourhood is the East End, not the fashionable East End, the real one, the one that makes West End people nervous, the one that Charles Booth will spend the rest of the decade mapping in his survey of London poverty. The highway, the area around the London docks, workers, sailors, immigrants. This is where Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe are beginning to arrive in real numbers, part of the wave that will grow into a flood over the next decade as the pogroms push people west. The smell of the East End is different from the smell of the Strand. Heavier, more industrial. The combination of the docks and the tanning works and the slaughterhouses and the cooking smells of a dozen different national cuisines overlaying each other in the narrow streets. The streets are narrower here. The buildings press closer. Danny held your arm tighter, and you understand why. Not because he's frightened exactly, but because the navigation is different, less predictable. More people moving unexpectedly. The queue for Wilton's gallery went round the corner. A halfpenny entry for the gallery, penny for the pit. You and Danny took the gallery. The hall itself, you could feel it as soon as you came through the door. Not just the heat, though the heat after the November street was almost physical, the relief of warmth hitting your face and neck, but the acoustic. A music hall has an acoustic unlike any street corner or church or coffee house. The hall is designed to focus sound. The barrel vault ceiling, the galleries on the sides, the pit below, all of it directing the sound from the stage toward the audience in a way that streets never can. The stage was lit by gas lamps, the brightness of which you knew about from the heat on your face and the way the audience oriented toward it, and the current act was a comic singer. You know he was a comic singer because the audience was laughing in the specific way that London music hall audiences laugh. Not politely, not in groups, but in waves. The laughter spreading from the people who got the joke first to the people who got it second. The songs were not elevated material. They were about recognisable things. A landlord who raised the rent, a wife who found her husband's second wife, a foreman at a factory who was universally despised and who suffered various impractical fates in the course of the performance. The audience knew these songs or had heard songs like them. This was the music hall idiom, the specific grammar of popular entertainment in the 1880s, which spoke directly to the actual lives of its audience, in a way that concert hall music simply never attempted. And then a fiddle player came on. You heard him from the moment he walked to the centre of the stage, the sound of the audience settling, the particular change in the ambient noise that meant attention was being paid. And then the first note. He was good. You could tell immediately that he was good. The intonation was clean, not just accurate, but expressive, with the kind of vibrato that had been developed through practice rather than habit, a vibrato that added warmth without being excessive. The bow technique was economical and effective, drawing the sound out of the instrument rather than forcing it. He played a polka, a hornpipe, a slow piece that wasn't quite a ballad but was in that territory, sentimental, precisely calibrated to the sentimentality of a Friday evening audience who'd worked hard all week and wanted something to feel. The audience gave him real applause, not polite, not the music hall equivalent of a coin in a hat. Genuine, full-room applause, the kind you can feel in your chest when you're sitting in the gallery and the sound fills the room. You sat still for a long moment after the act finished. Danny, beside you, said nothing. He'd learned when silence was right. "How good?" you asked. "How good what?" "Him, the fiddle player. How good did he look?" "How would I know?" "Did he look nervous?" "Sort of. A bit." "Did the audience like him before he started or after he started?" Danny thought about this. After. They looked bored at first. After. He'd won them after the first piece, which meant the first piece was good enough that they gave him the second, and the second piece made them stay for the third, and the third piece gave them the thing they hadn't known they wanted. That was the structure. That was the argument you needed to make to an audience. You could do the first two. You could make someone stop with the first piece. You could hold them through the second. The third was the thing you hadn't fully developed yet. You walked home from Wilton's with Danny's hand on your arm and the sounds of the East End closing around you as you moved west. The docks behind you, the Thames somewhere to the right, the complex commercial street life of Whitechapel making way gradually for the slightly quieter streets of the Strand approach. The fog was back. It came back most evenings in November. And the link boys were out, which you knew from their voices, the particular way they shouted their availability. "Light your way, sir. Light your way." You and Danny had a different arrangement. Danny was the light, 3p a day, every day for this essential service. But walking back from Wilton's in the fog, you thought about the link boys in a way you hadn't before. Boys of 10, 11, 12, Danny's age, some of them younger, out in the night streets navigating the same routes you navigated by day, earning pennies that they needed to exist. "Danny," you said, do you know any of the link boys? The ones who work this area?" "Some." "What happens to them when they get older? Too old for link boys?" Danny thought about it, with the particular gravity he brought to questions about the future. "Some of them go into service, boys who can get cleaned up and can speak right. The good houses take them as hall boys. And the others, whatever they can get," he paused. "I've got my uncle's rag and bone, for now." For now. The fog pressed in. Your boots found the familiar texture of the pavement, and you moved through it the way you move through everything now, not without uncertainty, but with the kind of confidence that uncertainty over time becomes. The winter deepened. December in London. The embankment is too cold from 7 in the morning until at least 9, which cuts 2 hours from the morning. The afternoons shorten. Darkness comes by 4, and working after dark is possible but harder, The foot traffic is different and the cold is worse. The gas lamps go on earlier. Christmas approaches and the streets change. The quality of the foot traffic shifts. People carry things, wrapped parcels from the sound and the way they walk, slightly encumbered. The shops along the Strand smell different. A bit of pine resin from decoration that someone has put outside. The specific sweetness of spiced things coming from somewhere. And the music changes too. Or rather, what people want from the music changes. You notice this first in mid-December. The unnamed G major piece from your grandfather was getting a different response than it had in October. Not louder applause, not more coins, but something harder to quantify. People stopping for longer. A specific kind of stillness. Women sometimes with their hands at their sides and something in their breathing that wasn't there in October. Christmas was doing it. Or the feeling of Christmas. The thing that the decorations and the parcels and the spiced smell in the air was producing in people who were walking home through the fog with their purchases, who were slightly more open to being transported than they were in ordinary time. You started adding pieces that worked in this register. Not carols. Carols were associated with the church, with children, with specific occasions that had their own gravity, and that a solo fiddle player co-opting would feel strange. But the qualities of carols, the minor keys that dip towards something bittersweet, the moments in traditional pieces where the melody dropped unexpectedly into warmth, a Welsh air that Silas had given you, not mine, never mine. I learned it from a Welshman in 1860, and he learned it from his grandmother, and nobody knows where she learned it. That had a quality of winter in it, a slow beauty that worked best in the cold. Christmas came. The shop closed for 2 days. Even Mrs. Wicklow's lodging house felt different. She served an actual meal with a piece of boiled meat that she called a joint without too much specificity. And there was a bottle of porter on the table, and Parliament got a bone that kept him occupied for most of the afternoon. The men in the house ate together at the long table and talked about things that weren't the usual lodging house talk. Families. Homes that used to be different from what they were now. Places that were being left further behind as London took up more and more of the geography of a life. The Suffolk man. William, you'd learned his name. He'd found his dock work on the 3rd attempt and was now a regular. Talked about a farm in Suffolk where he'd grown up near Ipswich, where the fields in winter went flat and white and you could hear the silence for miles. The silence has a sound, he said, and nobody laughed at him for saying it, because everyone at the table had known a silence like that once. Before London. Before London. You thought about Birmingham, about the sounds of it. Not the same as London, not this size, not this density, but still a city, still a manufacturing place with a manufacturing noise. You thought about the pen nib factory and the smell of the acid and the sound of the machinery. You thought about your aunt's front room and the chair by the window and the fiddle in the corner. You thought about how far you were from all of that, not in distance. Birmingham was 100 miles, 4 hours by rail, a thing you could travel back to in an afternoon if you had the fare. But in the way that living reshapes the map of possible selves, the Tom Briggs in Birmingham who might have happened wasn't you anymore. You were someone else. You were made, at least in part, by 7 months on the streets of London. After Christmas, January. Silas told you this was when he'd slept in doorways in 1878. The cold of January, the cold of the specific year. January 1884 was not 1878, but it was cold. The fog came in and stayed for 5 days straight, not the fog that cleared during daylight, but the real thing, The yellow-brown fog that London produced in its worst winters, that sat on the ground and didn't move and smelled of everything the city threw into the air, multiplied and compressed. The kind of fog that earned the name pea souper and meant every syllable. In pea souper fog the embankment was impossible. The foot traffic dropped to nothing. People stayed home when they could, or took cabs when they couldn't. The pitch on the Strand barely worked because the people who were out were moving fast, heads down, trying to get through it. You earned fourpence halfpenny on Monday, sixpence on Tuesday. Not enough. Not enough. 2 days in a row of not enough put you in a specific mental state that was different from the normal calculations of the working day. It was the state of watching the margins disappear, of doing the arithmetic at night and finding that the subtraction went further than the addition. Danny showed up on Wednesday morning to tell you he needed to go to his uncle for 2 days. Trouble, you asked. Sort of. He needs help with something. I'll be back Friday. 2 days without Danny. In the fog. You could manage without Danny in familiar territory, in good weather, in daylight. You'd done it before, but the fog changed the familiar territory. Landmarks you knew by sound were muffled, directions you knew by echo were wrong. It was frankly dangerous. You stayed in on Wednesday. The staying in was a specific kind of calculation. A day of no earning was a day of debt. The lodging still cost fourpence. The food still cost what it cost. The debt mounted whether you were on the streets or in the common room. But going out in the fog without Danny and falling into the Thames or under a cart was a bigger debt. There were blind men in London who'd done exactly that. Silas knew 2 of them by name. You stay in on the worst days, Silas had said, when you'd first discussed this. You eat less if you have to. You hold on. The fog doesn't last forever. Hold on. You sat in Mrs. Wicklow's common room on Wednesday and played the fiddle. Quietly. Not the street volume you used on the Strand, just enough to fill the room. The slow Welsh air. The unnamed piece. The hornpipe slowed down to something contemplative. The other lodgers, those who were in, listened in the way that people listen to something they haven't exactly consented to, but that they find themselves grateful for. William, the Suffolk man, sat by the fire and closed his eyes. Mrs. Wicklow came to the doorway of the kitchen and stood there for 10 minutes without speaking. When you finished, she said, "You should play at the concert hall." "I know." "No. I mean—" She paused. "The Lambeth concert rooms, off the cut. They have open night Saturdays. Different to the West End, but they take good acts. You stored this. The Lambeth concert rooms, off the cut, Saturdays. Thursday the fog lifted slightly. Danny was back by Friday. The uncle business was unclear as it usually was and you didn't ask. And by Saturday the streets were cold but navigable, and you played the Strand in the morning and Fleet Street in the afternoon, and earned 2 shillings and 2pence, which cleared the debt and left you 4pence ahead. 4pence ahead. In February this felt substantial. Silas found you on the Strand corner on a February morning and said, without preamble, "There's a man who wants to hear you play." "Who?" "His name is Colbeck, Arthur Colbeck. He runs the Lambeth concert rooms." Mrs. Wicklow's suggestion had apparently travelled through channels you hadn't traced. "He's heard about you." "I mentioned you. We know each other. He's heard me play, knows what I think is good, and I told him you were worth his time." A pause. "Whether or not you actually are, I can't guarantee, but I told him you were." This was, in the register of Silas's communication, not just a compliment, it was a commitment. Silas did not offer his reputation in support of things he wasn't reasonably confident about. When? Next Saturday, he'll be at the venue from 2 in the afternoon. Saturday, 6 days. What do you do with 6 days' notice of something that might change your circumstances? You do what you've always done. You play. Every day in whatever weather on whatever pitch is available, and you let the playing do what playing does when you give it enough time. Refine itself. Find its level. Develop towards something better than it was before. You worked on the unnamed piece. You worked on it not by changing it. You'd stopped trying to change it because it seemed to know what it was better than you did, but by working on the approach to it, the piece before it, what it needed to come after in order to land properly. You discovered by accident on a Tuesday afternoon in Fleet Street, when an old woman stopped and cried quietly for the duration, that it worked best after something fast and bright. The contrast created the space that the slow piece needed. A hornpipe at full speed, which put energy in the air and got people's attention. And then a pause, a real pause, 2 or 3 seconds, nothing. And then the first note of the slow piece falling into that space. The pause was the thing. The pause was where the music lived. You played the pause in Fleet Street and then the slow piece, and the old woman stood there and the people around her stood there, and a man in a top coat stopped, and then a woman with a shopping basket stopped, and by the time the piece was finished there were 9 people listening. Not walking past, not throwing a coin in transit. Actually stopped, standing still, listening. 9 people. 4 shillings and 7 pence from 9 people in one transaction of attention. You didn't understand it yet. You understand it better now. The pause was permission, it said. Something is about to happen that requires you to be still. And people, given permission to be still in the middle of a busy Tuesday in Fleet Street, permission from a piece of music they'd never heard, from a silence they'd stumbled into, took it. They took the permission, and they gave us back in coins. Silas, when you told him, was quiet for a moment. "The pause," he said. "The pause. I've had that. Different piece. 30 years ago." A pause, slightly longer than necessary. It doesn't come from technique. You can't practice it into existence. Then where does it come from? From being in it. From the piece being true. He said true the way he said things he was sure of but couldn't prove. When a piece is true and you know it's true, the pause is just the space around it. The space that proves it's there. 6 days later, you stood in the centre of the Lambeth concert rooms, off the cut in Lambeth, 30 steps from the back entrance, with the smell of the room around you, sawdust and beer and the faint sweetness of gas lamps. An empty room in the afternoon with Arthur Colbeck sitting at a table near the front and 2 other men you hadn't been introduced to. And you played. You played the hornpipe first, to put energy in the room, to establish that this was a fiddle player who could command a space. Then the pause, then the unnamed piece. The unnamed piece lasted 3.5 minutes. The room was absolutely silent for the duration. Colbeck said nothing for a while after you finished. Then, "Where did you learn that?" "My grandfather." "Where did he learn it?" "He didn't say. Before him, probably." Another silence. "I want you on Saturday nights," Colbeck said. 10 shillings a night, 3 pieces in the first half. If the audience responds the way I expect them to, I'll put you in the second half from April. 10 shillings a night. Your daily average on a good week was about 1 shilling and 6pence. 10 shillings was 6 days' work in one night. You didn't say yes immediately. You thought about what Silas had said. Good enough isn't the standard. And about the 9 people in Fleet Street and the old woman who cried and the florin from the man with the deep voice. You thought about the embankment in the fog and the cold and the 2 pennies on the morning that started all of this. Yes, you said. Good. Colbeck stood up. Be here at 6 on Saturday. I'll put you on at 8. He shook your hand. His grip was firm, brief, businesslike. The handshake of someone who's done this before and doesn't need to make more of it than it is. You walked out of the Lambeth concert rooms in the February afternoon, Danny beside you, and you stood on the pavement for a moment. Well, Danny said, Saturday night. How much? 10 shillings, Danny whistled. His particular tuneless whistle, the signal tone from the mornings. That's more than I make in 4 days, he said. I know. You going to need me on Saturdays? I'm going to need you getting there and back. Yes. Extra penny. A halfpenny. 3p. 2p. Done, Danny said. You walked back to Stamford Street with 2p committed to Danny and 10 shillings committed to Saturday night, and 6 days between now and then in which to hold on and stay sharp, and remember that the pause is just the space that proves the music is true. The first Saturday at the Lambeth concert rooms, nervous, in a way you hadn't been nervous since you first came to London, and the fiddle was the only thing between you and the workhouse. The nervousness expressed itself not in your hands. Your hands knew what to do. They'd been doing it in all weathers on all corners for 7 months and were not going to start second-guessing themselves now. But in the waiting backstage, the smell of backstage, which was beer and old canvas and decades of other performers, and the particular smell of a gas lamp close enough to warm your face. The sound of the audience, which was different from the street corner audience, gathered, expectant, already slightly warm from whatever they'd had to drink. Then the walk to the stage. 12 steps. Danny counted them from the wing to the centre, which was the arrangement, and then the particular feeling of standing on a raised floor with an audience below you, which you'd never done before in your life. The chairman, a large man named Fitzgerald, whose voice carried effortlessly across the full room without apparent effort, said something about a remarkable young musician, and there was polite, waiting to be convinced applause. You played the hornpipe, then the pause, then the unnamed piece. The silence during the unnamed piece was different in a room than on a street corner. On a street corner the silence was the absence of footsteps, the holding still of people who would normally be moving. In a room, the silence was something that the room itself participated in. The walls and the ceiling, and the people arranged facing the same direction, all of it creating a focused quality of attention that you'd felt at Wilton's and hadn't known how to describe. You felt it from the stage. The applause at the end was real. You could feel it in your chest, feel the direction of it. Then a third piece, the Welsh air, slow and winding, and more applause. Fitzgerald said something. More applause. Danny guided you back to the wing. How many, you asked. How many what? People. How many were there? Maybe 200. The room was pretty full. 200 people. You'd played for 200 people in a room standing still, waiting to be moved or not moved. Colbeck found you after. Second half from March, he said. Not April, March. He walked away before you could respond. March. February to March was 3 weeks. You walked home from the Lambeth concert rooms with Danny and 2 shillings and 6p of the 10. The rest coming next week, the arrangement being partial payment in advance. And the streets around Waterloo were quieter than usual for a Saturday night because the cold was keeping people in. But there were link boys out, and the gas lamps on the main streets were lit, and you knew the route well enough to half lead Danny rather than being led. Stamford Street, the door, the staircase, the missing riser on the 4th step from the bottom, the attic room. Lie down. Outside, London continued. The taverns, the night watchmen calling the hours, a cart on Stamford Street, late, its wheels on the wet cobblestones making the specific sound that meant iron rims on slippery stone, the sound of potential disaster managed by skill and experience. You lay on the straw mattress and listened to London. The city had a sound at night, when you'd been listening long enough to hear it. Not silence. Never silence. Not here. Not in this part of London. But a different rhythm than the day. The day was about transaction. People moving between places, the commerce of the streets, the exchange of coin and time and attention. The night was about the things underneath the transaction, the things that persisted when the trade stopped. People sleeping, people dreaming, people lying awake the way you were lying awake, listening to the city breathing. The sound of the foghorns on the river when the fog was down, that deep, mournful sound that came from ships making their way up the estuary, warning each other of their presence in the dark. The sound of the southeastern railway trains that ran over the bridge nearby, less frequent after midnight but still running. The weight of them transmitted through the ground and up through the building and faintly through the floor into your body. The sound of the city being, at 3 a.m, exactly what it was at 3 p.m, vast and complex and indifferent and full of people who were, each of them, navigating something. You thought about the view. You couldn't see London from any height. You'd never see London from any height again. The elevated view that was supposed to rewrite your sense of scale wasn't available to you. What you had instead was this: Waterloo Bridge at 2 a.m, in fog, when the river was running at ebb tide, when you could stand on the bridge, Danny beside you, or sometimes without Danny if the route was clear enough, and feel the structure vibrating slightly under your feet with the weight of the water running beneath it, and hear the river in a way you couldn't hear it from the bank. The river talking, not the surface. The surface was wind and current and the sound of water on stone. The river itself, something older and more permanent than the fog or the city or anything built on either bank. This was your elevated perspective. The bridge in the middle of the night, with the river below you and London on both sides, and the sound of the city coming to you from every direction at once. From the south bank behind you, from the Strand in front of you, from Hungerford Bridge and Westminster Bridge on either side. The city as sound. The city as a frequency in your chest and your bones, and the wood of the fiddle that was still on your back, because you always had the fiddle on your back. You couldn't see London, but you could hear it. The dome of St. Paul's you knew from the resonance of the hill. The river you knew from the smell and the vibration. The Strand you knew from its acoustic properties, and the particular smell of the coffee houses and the Savoy Theatre, and the dozens of shops and the feet of 10,000 people, daily wearing the same flagstones thinner. The East End you knew from the smell of the docks and the sound of the streets narrowing. Westminster you knew from the weight of the carriages on better laid roads and the specific quality of the air near Parliament. Every part of this city had a sound signature. Every street had a texture that told you where you were. Every season changed the way the buildings breathed and the way the air moved between them. You were building London, the way blind people build everything, from the inside out, constructing it piece by piece from sensation, from memory, from the particular information that comes when you have to pay close attention to everything because you can't afford not to. and standing on Waterloo Bridge at 2 in the morning with the river below and the fog above and the city humming on both sides, this was your view. This was your panorama. Not a visual map, but a sensory one. Not the city as it looked, but the city as it was. Everything it had been. The Romans on the river. The medieval bridge full of houses and history. The fire of 1666 that had cleared everything and let Wren build his dome. The cholera of 1854 that had killed 10,000 people and led directly to the sewers that kept the city's water barely possible. The fog that killed and the river that sustained and the trade that built the empire, that built the halls, that built the streets that you were standing on. All of it was in the air, all of it was in the sound. You played a note, G, open G, the lowest string just into the night air above the river. The bridge caught it and held it for a second. The river's sound absorbed it. The fog damped it. It disappeared. But it had been there. For 1 second, your grandfather's fiddle had put a note into the air over the Thames, in the middle of the night, in the fog, in London in 1884, and that note was part of the record now, inaudible. But true, spring came. The way spring comes in London is not the way spring comes in a field or a garden. It comes through sounds and smells before it comes through warmth. The birds before the temperature, the particular note that the wind changes to from the scouring northwest cold to something slightly warmer from the southwest, which carries different things. The smell of parks beginning faintly to produce green smells instead of cold mud smells. The flower sellers appearing on the Strand before the flowers were really out yet, because the flower sellers knew what was coming and were ready for it. And then the warmth itself, first as something you felt on the back of your hands and your face at noon, then at 10 in the morning, then earlier. The embankment in spring was different from the embankment in November. The river changed, the smell of it lightened, or your nose recalibrated after months of the heavy winter smell, and the tide on a spring morning had a freshness to it that the November tide never had. The embankment trees, whatever they were, Danny had told you, those plane trees, the big ones with the peeling bark, began to produce that sound of wind in leaves rather than wind in bare branches. A larger, rounder sound, more forgiving, and the foot traffic came back. People who'd been moving through the winter with their heads down and their hands in their pockets, and their attention on the ground in front of them began to lift their heads, to walk more slowly, to stop. Your earnings in March were higher than February. Your earnings in April were higher than March. By May you were making, across all sources, between 8 and 12 shillings a week. The Lambeth concert rooms on Saturday nights, the Strand in the mornings, Fleet Street in the afternoons, the occasional Sunday pitch when the weather was good enough, and the police were occupied elsewhere. Colbeck had put you in the second half of the Saturday programme from March, as promised. This meant going on later, after the interval, when the audience was warmer and slightly loosened by beer and the performances of the first half, but also more demanding. Having sat through 2 hours of entertainment, they wanted the second half to earn its place. You adapted. The programme evolved over the weeks in ways you tracked by the quality of the response. The pieces that worked in the second half were not the same as the pieces that worked in the first. The second half wanted more variation in tone, not just the arc from bright to slow, but something with more interior weather to it. Pieces that moved through more than one emotional state, that surprised the audience with where they ended up. You started writing, not formally, not notation, which requires sight, but in the way that musicians who play by ear write, in your body, working through a piece so many times that each variation becomes part of the physical memory, available without thought. A new piece emerged from the working. You didn't intend it. It appeared the way the unnamed piece from your grandfather had appeared in your grandfather's playing, without announcement, from somewhere deeper than intention. It started in D minor, which was not your usual register. You gravitated toward G and D major, the bright keys, the keys that worked on street corners in cold weather. But D minor was something else. It started in a place that felt like the lodging house in January, like the two-penny arithmetic of a morning that started with not enough, like the specific sound of sleeping in a shared room where 23 people were all breathing slightly differently, and none of them was breathing easily. Then it moved. Not to major, not the usual resolution from minor into light. It moved through something that wasn't quite either. A passage that Silas, when you played it for him, described as neither here nor there but meaning both. And then it resolved into D major, into something open and certain, a phrase that you'd taken from the hornpipe and recontextualized so that what had been cheerful in its original form was now something else, still bright, but earned. The brightness that comes after the minor. This is it, Silas said when you finished playing it for him on a Wednesday afternoon on his corner of the Strand. This is the music hall piece. It's not finished yet. It's finished enough. He was quiet for a moment. Where did it come from? I don't know. Mostly the unnamed piece from my grandfather. Partly the Fleet Street air, partly... You stopped. Partly what? Partly something I heard on the bridge at night. Silas was quiet then. Good. That's where the true things come from. Where the true things come from. You played the new piece at the Lambeth Concert Rooms on a Saturday in May. In the second half, after the comic singer and the clog dancer in the interval, the chairman introduced you as our young gentleman from Birmingham, which you'd never entirely forgiven him for, but the room knew you by now, knew what was coming, and there was a warmth in the applause that wasn't the polite waiting to be convinced of the first night. You played a short, bright piece to open. Then the new piece. D minor, finding its way through the middle passage, arriving at the D major with the hornpipe phrase transformed. The room was silent throughout. The same quality of silence you'd felt on the street corner in Fleet Street, but amplified by the walls and the ceiling and the 300 people facing the same direction. The applause at the end was the longest you'd ever received. Fitzgerald, the chairman, said something that made the audience laugh. Colbeck found you at the interval of the next week's programme and said, "I'm putting you on every Saturday from June. And I'm talking to a man at the Strand Music Hall about a Tuesday." The Strand Music Hall, in the West End, not Lambeth, the West End. "When?" you asked. "When you're ready," Colbeck said. He walked away before you could respond. "When you're ready." A phrase that could mean different things. From Colbeck it meant soon. It meant work hard and stay sharp and play the Lambeth Rooms until the new piece was as reliable as breathing. You walked home from the Lambeth Concert Rooms that Saturday night and stood on Waterloo Bridge in the mild May night and played the new piece into the air above the river. The Thames, at this hour in May, smells of salt coming up from the estuary, and the faint richness of the mud banks and the commerce of the day's traffic on the water. The bridge trembles slightly with the passage of a late goods train on the railway bridge upstream. The gas lamps on the embankment below cast their yellow circles on the water's surface. You play the minor section, the passage that is neither here nor there, the D major arrival. The notes go into the Thames night and the May air and the fog that is beginning. even in May, to thin enough that sometimes, Danny has told you, you can see the other bank. You can't see the other bank, but you can hear it, the late sounds from the south side, the particular quality of the air from a direction that isn't north. You think about the 2 pennies that were in your pocket on the morning that started all of this, 7 months ago, 8 months ago. The morning that smelled of 23 bodies and twice used tea. You think about Silas on his corner since 1856, about Danny's loose sole on his right boot, about Mrs. Wicklow's twice-used tea leaves and Parliament, the terrier and William the Suffolk man talking about white fields, about the old woman who cried in Fleet Street and the florin from the man with the deep voice and the 9 people who stood still, about Colbeck saying second half from March, not April, about the pause before the unnamed piece and what the pause was. You think about your grandfather's fiddle, the weight of it against your chin, the vibration of the wood against your collarbone. You play the hornpipe, the bright one. Full speed in the May night, above the river, and then the pause, and then the unnamed piece. The river receives it, the fog receives it, the city receives it, in the way that cities receive the things that happen inside them, not noting them, not recording them, just containing them, the way a century contains everything that happened in it, without separating the important from the unimportant, the audible from the inaudible. You are here. You are playing. This is happening. That's not nothing. You're 22 years old in a city of 4.5 million. You're blind, and Birmingham and 7 months turned into 8 months. 8 turned into seasons. You're a blind musician in 1880s London, which is one of the harder things to be, though not the hardest. You have a fiddle that belonged to your grandfather, and a pitch on the Strand that belongs to no one, and a Saturday night at the Lambeth Concert Rooms, and possibly a Tuesday at the Strand Music Hall, and 2 pence profit from every day that works. You have enough. The Thames is beneath you. The city is on both sides. The night air in May is mild enough to stand in without your coat. You lower the fiddle. The bow goes still. London breathes. Somewhere to the north, a church bell is starting to count the hour. You listen. 1, 2, 3. The bell has a particular tone. You know this one is the church on the north side of the Strand that has been ringing since before the Strand was the Strand. A warm, substantial tone, slightly imperfect in the way that old bells are imperfect, shaped by use and age into something unique. 3 in the morning, Danny will be asleep. Mrs. Wicklow will be asleep. Silas will be asleep on whichever cot he occupies, in whichever house he's in this week. William will be asleep after his dock shift. Parliament will be asleep, curled somewhere warm. You should be asleep. But there's this, the bridge and the river and the city and the fiddle and the night. There will be more mornings. There will be more strands, more embankments, more negotiations over positions and the arithmetic of coins. There will be more fog, more cold, more days that start with not enough and have to be worked into enough. There will be mornings when Danny is late, and mornings when your right arm aches, and mornings when the strings go flat in the cold and you have to tune them 3 times in an hour. There will be Saturdays at the Lambeth Concert Rooms, and possibly Tuesdays at the Strand Music Hall, and the piece in D minor finding its way to D major, the earned brightness, the resolution that only works because you played through the minor first. All of that is coming, but that's tomorrow, and the day after, and the spring turning slowly towards summer, and the summer into another autumn, and then another winter, and eventually, you don't know how many years, Silas would just say years, eventually you'd have been here long enough that 7 months becomes a story. You tell a new arrival, and the 2 pennies becomes the thing you say when someone asks what the beginning looked like. Right now, this moment, on the bridge, the river beneath you, flowing the way it has flowed for 10,000 years before Bazalgette built his embankment, and 10,000 years before that, moving toward the sea and always moving, always the same river and never the same water twice, the fiddle on your back, the city breathing. You've been listening to it long enough now that you can hear its rhythm. Not a heartbeat. It's not a heartbeat. That's too simple, too single. More like breathing, the in-breath and the out-breath. The day filling and the night emptying, the tide coming in and going out. The people arriving and the people leaving, and the people who stay and the people who don't. You're part of the breathing now. You came from outside, from Birmingham, from the pen nib factory, from the room where the lights went out and stayed out. And you've been breathed in, and you are here. And you are part of what makes the city make the sound it makes. The sound of it. All of it. The coal smoke and the river mud, and the twice-used tea and the horse traffic on the cobblestones, and the fiddler on the corner, and the link boy with his torch, and the watch calling the hour, and the fog coming, and the fog lifting, and the spring coming, and the spring staying, and the summer and the next autumn, and all the years ahead that you can't see but can hear, in the distance, in the dark, the way you can hear a space before you enter it, by what it sounds like from outside. You put your hand in your pocket. The 2 pennies aren't there anymore. They haven't been there for a long time. What's there is 1 shilling and 4pence, the remains of Saturday night. Enough for lodging and food and Danny, and still something left over. Enough. You turn from the river and start walking north. The bridge underfoot. The fiddle on your back. You know this city. Not all of it. Never all of it. London is too large to know completely, and Silas would tell you that's the point, that the city is always larger than what you know of it, and that's what keeps you honest. But you know this part. The Strand and the Embankment and Stamford Street and the route between them. You know it by texture and smell and the particular acoustics of each corner. You know it the way you know your grandfather's fiddle, not by looking at it, but from the inside. 14 steps from the north end of Waterloo Bridge, left, down the approach, the lodging house, the door, the passage, 12 stairs, the missing riser on the 4th step from the bottom. You step over it without thinking, up to the attic, the room, the cot, the straw mattress that used to seem hard and now seems exactly right. You take off the fiddle and lay the case on the floor beside the cot. Take off your boots. Lie down. Outside, London. The distant bell, ringing toward 4. A cart. Someone calling something. Too far away to hear the words, but close enough to hear the tone. Not urgent, not alarmed, just the late-night voices of the city going about its business. The fiddle in its case beside you. The 1 shilling and 4pence in your pocket, the bridge and the river and the unnamed piece, and the pause before the unnamed piece, and the pause is just the space around the music, and the space is just the city, and the city is just this. This is what it is to be here, this specific warmth, this specific dark. This specific sound of 22 other people breathing in rooms below you, and the city breathing beyond the walls and the river. You can't hear it from here. You're too far, but you know it's there, always moving. Let the sound carry you. Let the day fall away piece by piece. The fog morning embankment, Fleet Street in the afternoon, the Lambeth concert rooms, and the 300 faces you couldn't see but felt. Colbecken when you're ready, and the Strand Music Hall somewhere in the future. Let the arithmetic of it go. The pennies and the halfpennies and the farthings and the days that made enough and the days that didn't. Let Silas on his corner, playing the thing he's played since 1856. Let the stage at Wilton's where the fiddle player won the audience after the first piece. Let Danny's loose soul and the guide hand on your left arm above the elbow. Let Mrs. Wicklow's tea and Parliament, the terrier, and the Suffolk man and the white fields he remembers. Let the bridge, let the river, let the May night that's still there outside mild and willing. Let the city, the sounds soften. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have work and a fiddle and a Saturday night and people who know where you are. That's more than you had in November. That's more than a lot of people have tonight, in this city, in this century, in the dark. This is London, the greatest city in the world, and the cruelest, and the most alive. And right now, in the attic on Stamford Street at 4 a.m. in May, it is all of those things at once, and you are asleep inside them, dreaming of whatever it is you dream of. Fields in Staffordshire, maybe, or a room full of 300 people very still, or the G-string open on the bridge above the river, or the pause before the unnamed piece. The pause that is just the space that proves the music is there. And the city breathes in, and the city breathes out, and somewhere to the east the sky's doing something you can't see, but the birds can hear, and they'll tell you about it in an hour when they start, and the river runs, and London holds everything it has ever held, and will hold everything it ever will, all the lives, all the small economies of need and hope, all the mornings that start with 2 pennies and have to become enough, and the sound of it, the whole vast sound of it, fades not to silence to rest. Good night.